Alex had always loved the quiet charm of their neighborhood, the neat rows of homes, the gentle hum of cicadas in the evening, and the way neighbors smiled and waved as they passed by. Living here felt like a small-town dream wrapped inside the city limits. The Homeowners Association, the HOA, was supposed to keep things peaceful and pretty, but all that changed the day the letter arrived. It was a gray Tuesday morning when the heavy official-looking envelope slid under Alex's front door. At first, Alex barely glanced at it. Just another bill, maybe. But the moment their eyes landed on the HOA's letterhead, their hearts sank. Dear resident, it has come to the attention of the HOA board that your property is in violation of several community guidelines. The letter went on to list fines, more than $1,000 worth, against Alex. The reasons: a non-compliant fence, unauthorized landscaping, and excessive storage of personal items visible from the street. Alex blinked, confused and incredulous. None of this felt right. We're going to have to address these issues immediately, the letter warned. It was signed by none other than Mrs. Caldwell, the HOA president, a woman notorious for her iron grip on the neighborhood, with a reputation that made even the toughest residents tread lightly. Alex's mind raced. Fence? Landscaping? I've done nothing wrong. In fact, Alex had gone the extra mile last spring, planting a tidy row of shrubs and repainting the fence, all approved by the HOA months ago. There had been no complaints before. So why now? The sinking feeling twisted deeper when Alex noticed a final line at the bottom. Failure to comply within 10 days will result in further fines and potential legal action. That last threat felt personal. The following days were a blur. Alex tried calling the HOA office, but calls went unanswered or were met with curt refusals. Emails bounced back with cold, bureaucratic replies. Mrs. Caldwell herself declined every request for a meeting. What unsettled Alex most wasn't just the fines. It was the cold, deliberate way Mrs. Caldwell wielded her power. Whispers floated through the neighborhood about how she loved to make examples of rule breakers, even if the rules were unclear or selectively enforced. At the next neighborhood gathering, Alex caught cautious glances and tight-lipped smiles from neighbors who normally said hello. It felt like walls were closing in. Had Mrs. Caldwell already turned the community against Alex? One night, Alex sat on the porch, the letter burning a hole in their pocket, staring out at the quiet street. The house across the way was dark, but a faint silhouette of Mrs. Caldwell's figure appeared by a window, watching. Was this just paranoia, or had the HOA president already started to surveil Alex's every move? The spark of defiance grew in Alex's chest. This wasn't just about fines anymore. It was about standing up to an unseen force that threatened not only their property, but their peace of mind. What's really going on here? Alex whispered to the night. But the answer wouldn't come easy. And Alex was about to discover the fight was only just beginning. The days that followed felt like a slow, creeping siege. Every effort Alex made to clear the air was met with cold walls and clipped replies. The HOA office phone rang unanswered more times than Alex could count, and emails sent to Mrs. Caldwell and her board members either vanished into cyberspace or were answered with vague, dismissive notes. "You're not the first they've targeted," said Marcia, a neighbor who had lived on the street for over 20 years. She spoke in hushed tones at the grocery store, glancing around like she feared being overheard. "Mrs. Caldwell, she's got her favorites and everyone else. Well, let's just say she knows how to make people toe the line or break them." Alex felt a chill. The friendly neighborhood wasn't so friendly after all. It was a battlefield, and Alex was the latest to be caught in the crossfire. One afternoon, as Alex was mowing the lawn, they noticed something odd. Across the street, Mrs. Caldwell's minivan sat parked, a dark figure behind the wheel watching intently. Every few minutes, the window rolled down slightly, and Alex caught the glint of a phone, likely recording or taking pictures. Was this harassment? Surveillance? That night, Alex's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You should stop pushing back. Some things are better left alone." No signature, no explanation. Just a warning. The threat stung, but it only fanned the flames of Alex's resolve. If Mrs. Caldwell was trying to intimidate, it was backfiring spectacularly. Alex decided to push harder for answers. They dug out the HOA bylaws from the community website and scrutinized every clause. The fines cited non-compliance with landscaping rules, but those rules seemed vague, written in broad strokes. Even the fence height measurements were oddly specific, almost as if they were crafted to trap someone. Something didn't add up. At the next HOA meeting, Alex attended armed with questions and a calm determination. But as soon as they entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. Eyes turned cold. Whispers stopped abruptly. Mrs. Caldwell sat at the head of the table, her posture stiff, her gaze sharp as a hawk's. When Alex stood to speak, Mrs. Caldwell interrupted. "This meeting is for routine matters only. Your fines have been issued according to protocol. There will be no debate." Alex pressed on. "I'm here to understand why these fines have suddenly appeared. There's been no prior warning, no explanation. I'd like to see the evidence." A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Caldwell's voice dropped to a hiss. "The board's decision is final. Continued resistance will only lead to further penalties." It was clear. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. After the meeting, Alex lingered in the parking lot, catching a glimpse of a few neighbors quietly nodding their support, but none willing to openly defy Mrs. Caldwell. The fear she wielded was real, and it was suffocating. Back home, Alex found a small envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a blurry photo of Alex's backyard with the fence circled in red. A chilling note accompanied it. "We're watching." The silent war had begun. But Alex wasn't about to fold. There was a deeper story here, a secret Mrs. Caldwell was desperate to protect. Alex vowed to uncover it no matter what it took. The nights grew longer and the neighborhood's eyes grew colder. Alex realized this fight wasn't just about a fence or a few fines. It was about reclaiming the right to live in peace without fear. And that meant challenging the tyrant who ruled with an iron fist. The following morning, Alex woke with a restless urgency. There was no turning back now. The threatening notes, the shadowed surveillance, it all pointed to one thing. Mrs. Caldwell was hiding something, and Alex was determined to find out what. The fool. HOA office was a small, nondescript building on the edge of the neighborhood, usually locked tight by mid-afternoon. But today, Alex had a plan. With a borrowed key from a friendly neighbor, someone who had grown wary of Mrs. Caldwell's heavy-handed tactics, Alex slipped inside just as the sun was dipping low. Inside, the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paper. Filing cabinets lined the walls, each labeled with neat stickers. Meeting minutes, property records, fines and violations. Alex's pulse quickened. Somewhere in here lay the answers. They pulled open drawers quietly, rifling through stacks of documents. Most were dull routine matters, but then Alex spotted a file labeled Restricted, Confidential. It wasn't supposed to be here, or if it was, no one wanted anyone else to see it. With trembling hands, Alex opened the folder. Inside were maps, handwritten notes, and faded correspondence, documents that traced the neighborhood's land boundaries back decades. But something was off. Portions of Alex's property appeared to be outside the official HOA jurisdiction. There were annotations suggesting disputes, forgotten or buried. Just as Alex was piecing together the strange puzzle, footsteps echoed from the hall. Heart pounding, Alex ducked behind a filing cabinet, barely daring to breathe. Mrs. Caldwell's sharp voice cut through the silence. "I thought I heard something." The sound of heels clicking closer. Alex's mind raced. Caught here, trespassing, even if it was for the truth, could turn the whole fight against them. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. Alex waited a moment before slipping out, clutching the folder tightly. The discovery was a game changer. Back home, under the dim glow of a desk lamp, Alex spread out the documents. The maps revealed a boundary line that had shifted over time, but the HOA never updated their records. The area where Alex's home sat might legally be outside the HOA's enforcement zone. The handwritten notes mentioned a failed annexation attempt by the HOA's previous president, an effort Mrs. Caldwell was quietly trying to revive, but with aggressive fines and threats. Alex's mind spun. If this was true, the fines and the whole crackdown weren't about rules. They were about power, a land grab dressed up in bylaws. But the most disturbing detail was a scribbled note. Must keep. This quiet, no challenges to authority. Signed simply with Mrs. Caldwell's initials. This was no small mistake or bureaucratic mix-up. It was deliberate. The next challenge was clear. How to expose this without triggering a full-blown war. Mrs. Caldwell's reach was long and ruthless, Alex knew the fight was no longer just personal. It was about uncovering a deep-rooted secret that could shake the entire community. As Alex sat back, exhaustion settling in, their phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." But Alex felt a fierce determination growing. They had the truth. And now, it was time to find allies. Alex knew this wasn't a battle to fight alone. The documents uncovered at the HOA office were a breakthrough, but they also painted a target on Alex's back. Mrs. Caldwell's warnings and the mysterious surveillance showed how far the HOA president would go to protect her secret. The question was, who else was suffering in silence? Over the next few days, Alex made subtle, careful moves. At the local coffee shop, at the neighborhood park, at the community mailbox, Alex quietly approached a few neighbors, those who seemed uneasy during the last HOA meeting or who had hinted at their own frustrations. First was Marcia, the elderly woman with a sharp eye and a sharper tongue. She leaned in close over coffee and whispered, "You're not the first to get slammed with fines over rules. My husband and I were fined last year for excessive garden debris. We barely had a chance to argue before they hit us with more penalties." Next, there was Javier, a young father who had recently fenced his backyard. "They told me my fence was not approved, even though I had the plans submitted months in advance," he confided. "I just paid the fine." Fighting felt impossible. A quiet murmur was growing among the neighbors, but fear still held them back. Mrs. Caldwell's grip was tight. Her presence loomed over every street corner, every whispered conversation. Alex proposed a private meeting at the community center, AEAE, place neutral enough to avoid suspicion, but large enough for a few concerned residents. Invitations were sent discreetly, and on a cool evening a handful of neighbors gathered, faces tense but hopeful. "We're stronger together," Alex began, sharing the documents from the HOA office and outlining the evidence that the HOA was overstepping its boundaries. "Mrs. Caldwell has been using these fines not to enforce rules, but to bully and control. We need to push back, carefully, but firmly." The room buzzed with nervous energy. Some wanted to speak out immediately, others feared retribution. Trust was fragile. And then, almost as if the night had sensed their defiance, a shadow fell. Across the meeting room window, a faint, almost imperceptible noise came from the hall. Someone was listening. Panic fluttered in the room. Who could it be? Had Mrs. Caldwell already found out? Quickly, the group decided to keep the meeting brief. Before they dispersed, Alex pulled Javier aside. "Did you notice anyone unusual outside?" Javier nodded grimly. A man in a dark hoodie was pacing near the parking lot. I think he was watching us. The invisible eyes of the HOA's enforcers were everywhere. Back home, Alex's phone vibrated with a new message. Be careful who you trust. Foe. Warning was clear. Someone inside the neighborhood was feeding information to Mrs. Caldwell, maybe even from within their newly formed alliance. Betrayal was now a real threat. But retreat was not an option. Alex's mind raced. They had uncovered a dangerous secret, rallied tentative allies, and faced down surveillance and threats. What came next would require strategy, courage, and a deeper dive into the HOA's dark past. Because sometimes the biggest battles happen not on front lawns, but in the shadows, behind closed doors. The night of the HOA board meeting arrived with a thick tension that felt like electricity in the air. Word had spread quietly among the residents about Alex's challenge, but Mrs. Caldwell's iron grip had kept most silent. Until now. The community center was packed. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, whispers barely audible over the rustling chairs. The usual formalities barely masked the brewing storm. At the head of the long table sat Mrs. Caldwell, her gaze sharp and unyielding. She wore her usual stern expression, but tonight it held a flicker of something almost like unease. When the meeting opened, Mrs. Caldwell wasted no time. We are here to discuss the recent fines issued and uphold the integrity of our community, she said crisply. Any challenges will be heard briefly, but the board's decisions stand. Alex stood up, heart pounding but voice steady. I'm here to question those fines, specifically the ones against my property. I have documents showing that the HOA's jurisdiction doesn't fully cover my land. These fines are not just unfair, they're illegal. A hush fell over the room. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? Alex reached into their bag and spread the maps and notes across the table. The room leaned in, tension thickening. Before anyone could speak, a voice rang out from the back. It was Mr. Harris, an older homeowner who rarely spoke at meetings. I've been looking at these papers, he said carefully, and I agree with Alex. Something doesn't sit right with how these fines have been handed down. I too have questions about the HOA's procedures. Mrs. Caldwell's face darkened. This is an attack on the HOA itself, she snapped. We will not tolerate attempts to undermine our authority. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and another neighbor stepped in. Clara, a quiet woman who had kept to herself for years. I have something to add, she said nervously, holding up a folder. I found emails from Mrs. Caldwell herself, discussing plans to tighten control of the neighborhood and silence dissenters. She even mentions targeting certain homeowners with fines. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Caldwell's composure cracked for a split second, her lips pressed into a thin line. Those emails are private and taken out of context. Alex's heart raced. The tide was turning. But then Mrs. Caldwell leaned forward, voice cold and cutting. You're making a mistake. If this escalates, there will be consequences, legal and personal. The room's temperature seemed to drop. The threat was unmistakable. Alex met Mrs. Caldwell's gaze steadily. We're not afraid of consequences. We want fairness. We want the truth. At that moment, the meeting was interrupted by a loud crash outside. Several residents rushed to the windows where the HOA's infamous surveillance van was parked suspiciously close. Someone had shattered. A rear window! Whispers erupted into anxious murmurs. Mrs. Caldwell stood abruptly. This is getting out of hand. The board will adjourn until further notice. As people gathered their things, Alex caught the eyes of several neighbors, some fearful, some hopeful. The battle had just moved from paper and meetings to something far more dangerous. Walking out into the cool night air, Alex felt the weight of the fight ahead. Mrs. Caldwell had shown her hand, and the neighborhood was split like never before. But in that fracture lay a chance for change. Alex's voice echoed, softly to themselves. This is only the beginning. The days after the explosive HOA meeting felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. The neighborhood was divided. Some whispered about the courage of Alex and their allies, while others stayed silent, wary of Mrs. Caldwell's reach. But behind closed doors, the quiet unraveling of the HOA president's carefully crafted mask was underway. Alex sat at their kitchen table scrolling through the emails Clara had handed over during the meeting. The messages were damning. Mrs. Caldwell's words revealed a ruthless obsession with control and an intolerance for anyone who questioned her authority. She called neighbors problems and targets, discussed tightening the rules as a way to break the will of dissenters, and even joked about sending a message with those outrageous fines. But it wasn't just words. There were plans, schedules for covert surveillance, lists of residents to monitor, and budget requests for legal threats. The extent of her campaign against the community was chilling. Alex's phone rang, a number they didn't recognize flashing. On the screen. Hesitant, they answered. "Alex, it's Marcia," came the whispery voice. "You need to come to my house. There's something you need to see." Later that evening, Alex arrived at Marcia's cozy home, the scent of jasmine drifting from the garden. Marcia led Alex to her study, where a folder lay on the desk, thick with documents. "Before Mrs. Caldwell, there was another president," Marcia began. "He tried to expose some of the shady dealings here, but he was pushed out quickly. These are old letters, minutes from meetings, even recordings that prove Mrs. Caldwell has been using intimidation tactics for years." Alex flipped through the papers, eyes widening. This wasn't just a recent power grab, it was a legacy of fear and manipulation. But Marcia's voice trembled. "She's ruthless. If she feels threatened, she'll fight dirty. I've heard she's already hired lawyers to prepare lawsuits against some of us." The stakes had risen far beyond garden fences and parking rules. This was about a battle for the soul of the neighborhood. Determined, Alex compiled everything into a secure folder on their computer. They knew the next step had to be strategic. Public exposure could backfire if not handled carefully. That night, as Alex lay in bed, the weight of the fight pressed heavy on their chest. Mrs. Caldwell had shown her true face, no longer just a strict president, but a tyrant willing to trample anyone in her way. The question was, could the community stand together long enough to dethrone her? The answer was uncertain. Suddenly, a notification popped up, a news alert on Alex's phone. A local reporter had just published an article about HOA abuses in the area, including anonymous accounts that sounded eerily familiar. Hope flickered. Maybe this was the crack in the wall, the first real chance to break the silence and hold Mrs. Caldwell accountable. Alex's fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to respond, to share their story, to rally the neighbors and the public. The mask was slipping, and when it finally fell, the neighborhood would never be the same. The article hit the community like a thunderclap. Suddenly, what had been whispered behind closed doors and cautious conversations exploded into the open. Neighbors who had kept silent now found their voices. Some called the reporter, sharing stories of unfair fines, secret meetings, and Mrs. Caldwell's iron fist. Alex watched the response with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The spotlight was shifting, but Mrs. Caldwell was no ordinary foe. Her power was deep-rooted, and she was ready to fight back. Within hours, the HOA released a formal statement denying all allegations. They painted the article as biased and misleading, warning residents not to be swayed by what they called false narratives. More chilling was the veiled threat at the end. The HOA will protect the community's interests vigorously, including pursuing legal action against defamers. But the momentum had already built. At the next neighborhood gathering, dozens of residents showed up, some with signs demanding transparency, others simply curious or hopeful. The usual cold shoulder from Mrs. Caldwell's supporters was breaking down. Alex found themselves at the center of a growing movement. With the documents, emails, and new testimonies, they helped organize meetings and connect neighbors with legal advice and local media, yet the fight was far from over. One afternoon, as Alex sorted through messages on their phone, an unfamiliar text popped up. "Meet me at the park. There's something you need to know, before it's too late." Despite the nagging caution in their gut, Alex headed to the park after sunset. A shadowy figure waited beneath a lamppost, nervously glancing around. "I can't talk long," the stranger whispered. "But Mrs. Caldwell's plans go deeper than you think. She's not just fighting over fines. There's a development deal, a secret one. If she controls the land, she stands to profit big from selling parts of the neighborhood." Alex's breath caught. It explained the sudden, ruthless clampdown. The stranger handed over a small envelope thick with papers, contracts, emails, and financial statements linking Mrs. Caldwell to a powerful developer. "I'm risking a lot, telling you this," the figure said before disappearing into the night. Back home, Alex pored over the documents. It was worse than they imagined. Mrs. Caldwell wasn't just a tyrant enforcing petty rules. She was orchestrating a land grab, putting the entire neighborhood's future at risk. With this new evidence, Alex prepared to confront Mrs. Caldwell at the upcoming HOA election, a chance to finally challenge her authority openly. But just as hope surged, so did the danger. That same night, Alex's front porch light was smashed. A brick lay where the bulb had been, accompanied by a note scrawled in angry handwriting. "Stop or else." The message was clear. Mrs. Caldwell was desperate and dangerous. Alex stood at the broken porch light, looking out at the quiet street. The neighborhood was at a crossroads. The question wasn't if Mrs. Caldwell would fight back, it was how far she would go. And Alex knew one thing for sure. This battle wasn't over yet. The shattered porch light was more than just vandalism. It was a message that the war was escalating. Alex could feel the weight of every gaze on their street, every whisper in the grocery store. Mrs. Caldwell was not going down quietly, but neither was Alex. The HOA election day arrived like a storm gathering. On the horizon, the community center was packed with neighbors, some nervous, others determined. The tension was palpable, every seat taken, every eye fixed on the head table where Mrs. Caldwell sat, poised and steely. Alex stood before the crowd, papers in hand, ready to deliver the truth. "I stand here not just for myself," Alex began, voice steady, "but for every neighbor who has felt bullied, silenced, or threatened by the misuse of power. We have uncovered plans, emails, and evidence that reveal Mrs. Caldwell's true intentions, not to protect our community, but to profit from it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Caldwell's lips pressed into a thin line. She rose slowly, her voice cold but controlled. "These accusations are baseless. I have served this community for years with dedication. Any suggestion otherwise is an attempt to undermine our progress." But the momentum was against her now. Alex's evidence was thorough, contracts linking her to a developer planning to carve up the neighborhood, emails outlining intimidation, tactics, and a growing coalition of neighbors demanding change. When the votes were tallied, the result was decisive. Mrs. Caldwell was voted out. But the story didn't end there. Days later, a surprise came in the mail for Alex, a thick envelope from a law firm. Inside was a letter. The developer had withdrawn their plans after intense public pressure, and the HOA was being restructured with a new transparent board. Then, the twist no one expected. Alex discovered that the landlines shown in the old documents weren't just administrative errors. They were tied to a long-lost deed dating back to the original community founders. The property boundaries legally recognized Alex's home as a separate parcel, exempt from certain HOA controls. With this revelation, Alex's victory wasn't just symbolic, it was legal and permanent. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The shadow that Mrs. Caldwell had cast was lifting. At the next block party, neighbors celebrated, not just the change in leadership, but the reclaiming of their community spirit. Alex stood among friends and allies, feeling the hard-fought victory settle like warm sunlight. They had faced fines, threats, and intimidation, and emerged victorious by standing firm, seeking truth, and showing who really owned the land. Sometimes, the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with courage and conviction. And in the quiet streets of that once tyrannized neighborhood, a new chapter had begun.